One of Kara no Kyokai's biggest strengths is the quality of its characters. Everyone brings something to the table, and even characters that only appear in one movie can be the subject of a ton of praise and analysis. Yet, in this great cast, there's one character that is incredibly interesting and is relevant in nearly every movie, but is very rarely talked about. That might sound surprising, especially since having plot relevance in just one movie should be enough to get such a character some attention. Trust me though, there is a character that fits this description, and the answer is probably not what you'd expect. Because the most underrated character in K&K is none other than Shiki Ryogi. Not the protagonist we follow throughout the story though. I'm talking about the male personality that once lived inside of her, one that also has the name Shiki Ryogi. In order to understand why this character is interesting, it's important to understand what exactly he is. The person Shiki Ryogi was born with two personalities, a feminine side with a Shiki part of the name using the kanji for ceremony, and a masculine side with a Shiki using the kanji for weave. When Kara no Kyokai was translated to English, the male personality was given the same name in writing, but with all the letters being capitalized in order to make them easier to differentiate. So, for the purposes of the video, I'll be referring to the female personality as Shiki, while the male personality will be referred to as all capitals Shiki, or simply all caps for short. But what makes the two of them different from each other? Well, one key difference is their form of speaking. Shiki usually speaks in a very reserved and soft-spoken tone, fitting for what is meant to be her feminine side.
あ、ごめん。式には関係ない話だった。
別に関係がないってわけじゃないわ。ただ。
何？
そういうの食事時のお話じゃないでしょ。
On the other hand, all caps will speak in a tone that no other character in the story does, laid back and irreverent.
そうだね。
俺お前のそういうところがいいと思う。けど、式はそういうのが嫌なんだ。ズレっていうのはこういうこと。今日はここまで。俺はお前のことが気に入ったから、近いうちにまた会うよ。
It's a tone that makes his scenes have some lighthearted energy, which makes watching him a lot of fun. However, the main difference between the two is far darker. All Caps has a deep fascination with murder. He constantly has an urge to kill, which leads him to take walks late at night in hopes of finding an unfortunate victim he can take the urge out on. He is the darkness within Shiki Ryogi, as All Caps himself puts it. A rather fitting description given how heavily Shiki as a character is associated with the concept of yin and yang. But, in the same way that the Taijitsu shows that there's always light within the darkness, All Caps isn't someone who is driven entirely by his desire to kill. In fact, there's a desire within him that is arguably much greater, his desire to make Shiki happy. Since Shiki was born with a second personality, especially one with such a twisted desire, she grew up with a dislike for other people. She never spoke to anyone in school, and pushed away people who tried to get close to her, fearing that they may find out about All Caps. This fills All Caps with a sense of guilt, as he feels like it's his fault that Shiki can't live normally, and has had to spend her whole life feeling lonely. So, when Mikiya Kokuto enters the scene and continues talking to Shiki despite repeatedly being pushed away, All Caps sees this as an opportunity. Mikiya is Shiki's ticket to a normal life, but as long as All Caps exists, she will continue to push others away to hide that part of herself. Knowing this, All Caps decides that there's only one way forward. He dies, leaving Shiki completely alone for the first time in her life. Throughout the movies, All Caps doesn't have that much screen time. He's mentioned and alluded to in nearly every movie, but the bulk of his screen time is in Murder Speculation Part 1. Outside of this, he only gets a few more minutes of screen time in Future Gospel and a very brief cameo in Oblivion Recorder. Despite this, his presence is felt in every single movie, as his personality becomes the template for what Shiki becomes after his death. The quiet demeanor that previously defined her is replaced by a more crass attitude. It's clearly modeled after All Caps' personality, but it also leans towards being mean-spirited, likely because of the pain of losing him.
ま、とにかく要件はそれだけだ。何かあいつに伝言あるか？
それでは一つだけ伝えてください。兄さん、早くこんな女と手を切ってくださいって。
いいね。そう伝えておくよ。じゃあな。
There's also another indicator of All Caps' influence on Shiki that you can spot if you understand a little bit of Japanese. When Shiki speaks to Mikiya prior to losing all caps, she refers to herself using watashi, a pronoun that is considered gender neutral in a formal context, but in a casual context is mostly used by women.
それができなくなったから読んだの。あなたは私が人殺しじゃないって言ったけど。残念ね。私人殺しよ。あなただって現場を見たくせに、なんで私を見逃すの？
On the other hand, all caps refers to himself using the pronoun ore, which is considered masculine and is used almost exclusively by men in a casual context.
白状するとさ、俺は四季の破壊衝動みたいなもんなんだ。でもまあ、ここんところ俺とあいつはずれてるからな。いや、どうあがいたって肉体の使用権は四季のものだ。俺がこうして黒糖と会っているのも四季があっていいと思ったからだぞ。
After all caps dies, Shiki refers to herself using ore and never deviates from it regardless of context.
あんたの仕業ね。
はあ？そりゃ言いがかりだよ。俺だって被害者なんだ。
本当に俺は人殺しなんだ。
別に。俺だってそうだから。
But the biggest reminder of all caps throughout all of these movies has to be the relationship between Shiki and Mikiya. It's a relationship that is relevant to every single movie, and is oftentimes a major factor in the central conflict of each plot. While there's a lot that can be said about how the two eventually grow close to each other, it's important to remember that this wouldn't have been possible without all caps and his sacrifice. Shiki herself remembers, which is why she tries so hard to protect Mikiya while also doing what she can to make sure all caps isn't forgotten. If I had to choose one scene that encapsulates everything that's great about all caps, it would have to be the final scene of the last movie, Future Gospel. Sometime before his death, all caps was on a routine walk when he came across an old lady claiming to be a fortune teller. He's skeptical at first, but decides to try it out anyway, likely with the intent of attacking the lady if she turns out to be a fraud. But the lady tells him that he's going to die, that he has no future. This makes him realize that she's a real fortune teller, as he had already decided that sacrificing himself was the only way for Shiki to be with Mikiya. He tries to back away, no longer feeling any desire to hurt the lady. But before he leaves, she offers him some reassurance, and what follows is a moment that is better seen than heard.
そうじゃないのよ。何をやっても死ぬのは確かなんだけど。珍しいわ。こういう未来があるなんて。あなたはもうじき消える。道行きは真っ暗で、未来はどうしようもない。残るものはないし、救われることもない。なのに不思議ね。それでも、あなたの夢は生き続けるわ。
じゃあな、せいぜい長生きしろよばあさん。この辺りの夜は物騒だ。年寄りには向いてないぜ。
It's easily my favorite scene involving all caps, and one of my favorite scenes in the entire series. It didn't matter that he would disappear. It didn't matter that he wouldn't be there to see Shiki grow to love Mikiya. All that mattered was that Shiki would eventually become happy, and once that was assured, there was no need to hesitate anymore. And I can't help but love that about him. All Caps is a great character. His personality is unique among the rest of the cast. His sacrifice is tragic yet noble. His words and actions echo throughout the entire story. And yet, he's not really talked about much. It's like there's no trace of him beyond a handful of conversations with Mikiya. I can relate to Shiki in that sense, because I don't want him to be forgotten either. So if you're watching this on the day this comes out, then today is February 17th, meaning that today is Shiki's birthday. If you're doing something to celebrate, whether it's rewatching the movies, drawing fan art, or simply posting about it on social media, I want to ask you a favor. Don't forget about the boy, alright? Remember, it's his birthday too, and he deserves just as much love as his sister does.